First up, number 10, we have a woman who didn't mean to do it.
I didn't plan to murder him. I didn't plan on going into the prison and then having him die. I made a mistake.
You don't have to have intent to kill in order to be guilty of this crime.
So that was 34-year-old Melissa Gillette, who had the outburst in court trying to plead her case. She was pleading that she murdered the man she loves, Jason Nyberg, by accident, and she shouldn't be punished. I'd for sure sentence her to prison for a very long time, so she doesn't accidentally murder other people.
I feel guilty for what happened to him. He was my best friend.
She didn't mean to do it. This much was clear inside Judge Tom Neville's Rice County courtroom.
I screwed up. I relapsed. I was clean for 10 years.
Gillette smuggled in meth to Nyberg in a capsule inside of the Minnesota Correctional Facility, so she was already in prison. Nyberg took the pill and died 3 hours later in his cell from an overdose. In court, Gillette said, and I quote, "I didn't plan to murder him. I didn't plan on going into prison then having him die. I made a mistake," and the judge replied with, "You don't have to have the intent to kill in order to be guilty of this crime." Moving on, number 9, we have a young couple who was sentenced together. And I guess they freaked out together.
It is life without parole. It requires a DNA sample to be taken upon arrest, which is often like a cotton swab or in the inside of your cheek.
You just watched 27-year-old Seth Welch and Tatiana Tersari. They're a Michigan couple who was just charged in the death of their daughter. They were charged with homicide, felony murder, in which they got life without parole.
The second offense that you're both charged with is called child abuse in the first degree, where they're alleging you knowingly or intentionally caused serious physical harm to a child. They're talking about this Mary Welch.
Mary Welch, their daughter, was just 10 months old and she died from malnutrition and dehydration due to neglect. This was ruled by a medical examiner. She weighed just 8 pounds at the time of her death. After the daughter passed away, the parents waited 90 minutes before reporting it to the police. I mean, why are you waiting an hour and a half?
Possible penalty of up to life imprisonment or any term of years less than life. Now those are the two separate felony charges.
Number 8.
How can you even sit there and say the evidence? What evidence? None of the evidence you're saying.
That was 6-year-old Regina Johnson, and she was freaking out during her long trial for murdering her daughter and husband. Johnson shot her 14-year-old daughter and husband in the condo, and for some reason she stayed with the bodies for 3 days before reporting their deaths. After the court hearing, she was sentenced to 80 years to life in state prison. She was convicted of second-degree murder.
Ruben and shooting him. Ruben was standing up when I shot him. I shot him because he shot my daughter.
You can see at the end of the clip that Johnson's lawyers were trying to have her not talk anymore because she was admitting to the murder. But what she said was very interesting. She was charged for 2 murders, but did her husband actually commit 1 murder and Johnson killed him because of it? I'm not sure if we're ever gonna know the truth, but murdering someone for killing someone else isn't really the answer. But it's just so sad knowing if that was the situation. Moving into number 7, let's talk about the University of Southern California shooter, Brandon Spencer. He was 21 years old when he opened fire on a rival gang member on the USC campus. During the shooting, 4 others were injured. During the trial, he was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison, and he just lost control. He started to bang his head on the table. I still think it's crazy that so many people have guns in America, especially after all of these school shootings. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. It's the boring question now. Should guns be banned? I know it's hard to collect millions of guns, but I think the law needs to be passed, or at least something. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Moving into number 6, we have Dustin Armstrong, who broke down into tears after he was sentenced to 50 years in prison.
Dustin Armstrong's chance to say something about what he'd done.
Do you have anything you wish to say to me prior to my announcing what I'm going to do here today, sir?
No, Your Honor.
So that was Armstrong's chance to apologize for what he has done. Armstrong is from Iowa, and he is just 20 years old when he brutally beat a toddler. I'm pretty sure it was his own kid. Armstrong's admitted to grabbing the toddler's jaw and slammed him against the wall.
Last April, police found 2-year-old Braden Young unconscious in his Ottumwa home with a broken jaw and extensive brain damage. Armstrong admitted in Monday's hearing that he grabbed Braden's jaw and slammed his head against a wall. Doctors told Braden's mother they thought he was going to die. Braden has made a remarkable recovery, but his mother says he will likely face challenges from the beating for his entire life.
I don't feel bad for Armstrong one bit, and I think 50 years in prison, it may not be enough time for what he did. Alright, number 5, we have Darla Jackson, who had road rage that caused an accident that killed U.S. Navy Chief Petty Officer. Apparently Jackson hit the officer so hard that the family couldn't identify him. Is this real life right now?
I'm going to commit you to the Department of Corrections, Ms. Jackson, for the middle term of 6 years for the reasons I've stated.
Okay, wait. Did this woman only get 6 years in prison?
For the middle term of 6 years for the reasons I've stated.
I'm so confused right now. How did she not get life in prison?
Prosecutors argued Jackson ran over Bube in a fit of road rage on a South Bay freeway in May of 2015. Deputy District Attorney Laura Evans said Jackson drove 93+ miles an hour that day, chasing Bube across 4 lanes of highway. When she ran into Bube, she was barely 5 feet behind him, going 80 miles an hour.
Number 4.
I'm withdrawing my plea of guilty to not guilty, and I'm withdrawing my plea to appeal. I'm withdrawing my plea to appeal.
Well, that was Marcel Brooks, who was babysitting a 2-year-old when he shook him, causing him broken bones and a spine, and also left him with brain injury. After Brooks started ranting and yelling in court, the judge started to freak out, and he lashed out at Brooks. The stories that judges have to listen to, it must be absolutely insane. I'm not sure how I would sleep at night listening to all these murder situations and people like Brooks who cause harm to a baby.
And if you refuse to sign it, I'll sign it on your behalf because you abused a child years ago. You admitted to me you abused this child.
The repeated outbursts are the final act of a case that began in October in the town of Tonawanda when Brooks was babysitting the 22-month-old and violently shook him in a moment of frustration.
During one part of the trial, Brooks had the audacity to smile at the family.
He coyly smirked to Justice William Bowler, even smiled to members of his family. At one point, he tried to withdraw the guilty plea of first-degree assault.
Something is messed up with that guy. Number 3.
I'm so sorry to all that family, but nothing can take away from that. Nothing can explain that. I gotta wake up every day with that. So just ask.
So that was 22-year-old John Freeman, who burst out crying during his sentencing. He was trying to apologize to the family, saying sorry for killing 5-year-old Isabella Tennant. Freeman received 22 years to life in prison. Poor little girl was just a week away from starting kindergarten. Her body was found in a bag in an alleyway near Niagara Falls. Okay, Niagara Falls is in Canada. I think we should skip the 22 years part and just give this guy life in prison. Freeman was just 17 years old when the crime was committed. Freeman choked the little girl to death while babysitting at their grandparents' place. Freeman did confess to the police what he did, and he said what happened in detail very calmly, very concerned. So why was this kid freaking out now that he's being sentenced to life?
In court, Freeman said he was remorseful. Through the tears, he told Bella's family he's sorry for what happened.
I'm so sorry to all that family, but nothing can take away from that.
I think it was coerced into the apologies, and those tears are absolutely fake. Number 2.
$25 plus a $50 DNA databank fee. All to be paid out of prison funds. You have 30 days within which to file a notice of appeal.
This woman broke down in tears after she was sentenced in court. She was in court for a murder in Buffalo. She killed an elderly man.
Be sentenced to a determinate sentence of 21 years plus post-release supervision of 5 years. The mandatory surcharge of $300 is hereby imposed.
This woman couldn't even look the judge in his face. As soon as she heard her sentencing, she just broke down. After the sentencing, the police officer had to escort her out, and she just let it loose.
33-year-old April Stone, as you just saw and heard sobbing, was sentenced to 21 years to life in prison for first-degree manslaughter. She pleaded guilty to killing 72-year-old Lincoln Burks during a robbery at his Cornwall Avenue apartment back in January.
And finally, number 1, you guys won't believe this next one.
We, the jury, do we...
These were the final minutes of Michael Marin's story and life.
Do find the defendant, Michael James Marin, guilty of arson of an occupied structure.
How he got here is a tragic and bizarre tale.
This situation is really insane. On trial was Michael Marin, a 53-year-old millionaire who made most of his money on Wall Street. Marin had a friend and business partner who lost their home to a foreclosure, couldn't afford it anymore. So Marin ended up buying that home at a very low cost. Since the house was bought at a lower cost, he devised a lottery to sell the house with profit and give some of the money to charity. A lottery house is selling a house by selling raffles to generate funding. The intent is to try to sell enough to cover the sale of the price of the house to make profit on it, and the house goes to one lucky winner. So say if like everyone can buy tickets for $100, you know, 100,000 people buy tickets, you're making a lot of money. And this avoids using a realtor, paying fees, and all the hassles that come with selling the house. But selling the house in this way is very, very risky, and what if you only get like $10,000? Also, I forgot to mention to you guys, it's highly illegal in the States. The lottery draw was supposed to happen on July the 4th. Why would they choose that day, 2009? But authorities found out about it, shut it down, so that's when Marin burned the house down, probably so we can claim the insurance money on it. Well, he was given up to 21 years in prison. What Maine does next, you guys won't believe.
After he appears to swallow something after the verdict is read, notice as he reaches down and appears to get something from his bag. He then wipes his face, swallows something, and appears to swallow again. About 8 minutes later, Marin starts convulsing and collapses.
Right after the sentencing, Marin freaks out and took a pill that killed himself. This was a Yale Law School graduate and a very successful man who just made, a mistake.
Even though it's not been officially determined what killed Michael Marin, it's believed Marin swallowed some type of poison. Marin's attorney says the convicted arsonist showed no signs of preparing to commit suicide.
It was a gigantic shock. I think it's fair to say that we certainly had no inkling that this was going to happen. I'm not aware that anybody did.
Starting off this list, number 10, with the mother and daughter's desperate plea. An 18-year-old teenager was sentenced to 20 years in prison after she used a dating app to set up a robbery that resulted in another teenager getting shot. When the judge handed down her sentence, the girl's mother dropped to the floor, crying out of extreme grief. The teenage girl was screaming for her mother and begging the judge to give her a lighter sentence. And oh yeah, I have a video clip of this. Watch. Headbanger comes into number 9. Brandon Spencer is serving a life sentence for opening fire at a Halloween party store, and this took place at the University of Southern California. He was charged with 4 counts of attempted murder, and this is his reaction to his arraignment.
21-year-old Brandon Spencer of Inglewood bangs his head as a judge sentences him to 40 years to life after he was convicted of shooting a rival gang member at a 2012 Halloween party on the USC campus.
Number 8 brings us to 2 females who freak out after receiving a life sentence.
Be sentenced to the State Department of Corrections for a period of life. You will get credit for any of the time that you've served. That will be
These 2 women collapsed in court after they were both handed life sentences for the death of a 3-year-old girl. Shortly after the judge read their sentencing, they fell to the floor with emotional outcries and they had to be wheeled out of the courtroom. Okay, moving into number 7, definitely unlucky number 7 for this one. Jaleel Hoskins pleaded guilty to 2nd-degree murder after tampering with evidence after he violently murdered a mother of 5 and dumped her body in a trash dumpster. When the judge ordered him to serve a life sentence without the possibility of parole, he threw the podium towards the judge and he had to be dragged out of the courtroom by the deputies. Take a look at this.
Your Honor. I love you, Mom! That's what you get! I hope you learn it!
Man fights with deputies comes into number 6. A 19-year-old received a sentence of life imprisonment after he shot and killed another man in an attempt to rob him. The convicted killer was still hopeful that he would at least get the chance of parole, but when the judge said that parole was out of the question, it sparked an aggressive outburst. You guys won't believe this. Take a look. Number 5 takes us to a man threatening to kill the judge. I mean, come on. Is this real life right now? During his trial, Juan Rodriguez was being convicted of murder for stabbing a nurse at a mental health facility. Instead of making any last-minute pleas, he threatens to kill the judge if he didn't let him out of jail, like as if that was going to work.
Listen to me. You don't let me out of here, I'm gonna kill you. I'm a Jew. I'm gonna take your life if you don't let me out of here. Okay? I'm done.
Yeah, that's probably not the smartest thing to say to a judge who literally has your fate in her hands. A 19-year-old man went into an aggressive rage after a jury sentenced him to death for a murder, and this comes into number 4. He began knocking down chairs before he was tackled by dozens of courtroom officers who eventually dragged him out of the courtroom. Take a look at this outburst. Stun gun shocks its way into number 3. Andrew Worth was charged with first-degree murder after he shot and killed a police officer. His bail was set at $1 million, and after the judge sentenced him, this is how he reacted. The officers had to use an electric stun gun to calm him down before they carried him out of the courtroom. Okay, moving on, number 2 brings us to Michael Marin. After he was found guilty of arson and almost facing a life sentence behind bars, he placed his hands over his mouth and swallowed something. A few minutes later, he began gagging and he died in the courtroom. A toxicology report discovered that he had poisoned himself with cyanide after he heard the verdict of his sentencing. This is insane.
Appears to swallow something after the verdict is read. Notice as he reaches down and appears to get something from his bag. He then wipes his face, swallows something, and appears to swallow again. But 8 minutes later, Marin starts convulsing and collapses.
A violent man makes its way into number 1. A judge sentenced Marshall Iguana to 40 years in prison for aggravated assault after he cut his niece with a butcher knife. After he heard the sentencing, he used a thin blade from a safety razor and he slit his own throat in an apparent suicide attempt. He did survive, and he'll probably receive more time for sneaking contraband into the courtroom. And at number 10,
and I'm menacing the Commonwealth.
Okay, you're in contempt again. You've already been held in You're in contempt again.
We have Leon Montgomery, who is facing a 30-year sentencing for the death of a newborn baby. He was freaking out at the judge, saying he was innocent and he deserves a new trial. Leon was waiting for his new trial for a few years. He finally got it. When he received 30 years, that's when he started to freak out, and the judge gave him an additional 6 months for freaking out in court.
What y'all doing here is wrong to people.
And that'll be 6 months to serve when you finish serving.
You know, 6 months, I got 30 years. Everybody here get.
Control yourself, I'm going to remove you from the courtroom.
And you know what, I'm not sure if I believe that the judge should give an additional 6 months for this guy freaking out in court, because this guy's life just flashed before his eyes. He got 30 years. It's really hard to just stand there and just, you know, take the punishment calmly. I think the judge should have just sentenced him quickly and dismissed him, just send him right to prison right away. But then again, this man committed murder, so why go easy on him? He didn't go easy on the victim, did he?
Again, has shown zero respect for the law, no remorse for killing a child in this case.
Number 9, we have 32-year-old Robert Hodge, who is a father of 3. Well, he appeared in front of a judge and his family while being sentenced for murdering his 3 children. He strangled 2 of them with a belt. One of his kids was just 7 months old. And Robert also tried to kill his wife. I mean, is this real life right now? How do people become so messed up that murder is on their mind? So the clip I'm about to show you guys is from a courtroom in California.
Julie and Lucas are gone.
Robert begged the courts for forgiveness, but luckily the judge said the court does not forgive him and will give him a life sentence if he pleaded guilty, so he pleaded guilty. If he didn't plead guilty, he would have been given the death penalty.
Rob to be a good man before this horrific event. He wanted him to know that we all love.
Okay, moving into number 8.
I do accept the responsibility for what I've done. I know I was in the wrong. But I want you all
No, that is not me. That is not me. That's not.
So that person freaking out was actually 20-year-old Tories who decided to drive around yelling the N-word, and she was also threatening people with the gun, including children. Well, those acts was enough to charge her with street gang terrorism, so she was sentenced to 15 years behind bars. Hopefully 15 years is enough time to smarten up and realize what she had done.
I forgive you. I forgive all of you. I'm not a big spirit like this. I do.
Alright, moving into number 7. And this clip is actually of a father freaking out during a sentencing of a convicted killer. Let me tell you guys the backstory. Van Terry is the father you're about to see. He attacked convicted sex offender and murderer Michael Madison in court. And this is after he murdered his daughter Sherelle Terry. This took place in Cleveland, and it's really, really sad. The father was detained, but hopefully he wasn't arrested because this is a very difficult situation to stay contained in, to stay, calm. The father was probably in court during the whole trial, listening to all of the details about how his daughter died. Okay, moving into number 6, we have this young guy who was just given a life sentence for murder. From listening to the court tapes of this guy, it seems like fire was involved with this crime because you can hear the judge talking about burn patterns. Well, at the end of the trial, the judge sentenced this young man to life in prison, and this guy just bursts out crying. And of course he's begging for forgiveness, and then he falls to the ground in total shock. And at number 5, we actually have a judge who freaked out at a convict, and you know what? I couldn't believe it. Professionalism was just thrown out the window.
You know, if this was a death penalty state, you'd be getting the chair.
I'm kind of glad that this judge freaked out. I wish judges act like this more often.
You gutted him like a fish in that apartment too. You were relentless. You stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed until he was dead.
Times like this, it must be very hard. It must be really tough to be a judge. I couldn't imagine hearing about all these brutal crimes day and night.
Do what you have to do.
I agree with the family. I hope you die in prison as well.
Well, I guess we know where this judge stands when it comes to the death penalty. And I want to know, where do you guys stand? Do you believe in it? Are you guys against it? Let me know in the comment section below. At number 4, we have Mr. Jones, who is in court accused of murder. While he was in front of the judge, he decides to act like this.
Like it?
I don't know, sir. I don't have any idea. I just ask that you answer my questions. Are you currently employed?
I'm really afraid for that officer right next to him. I'm afraid for her life because Mr. Jones thinks he's a vampire and he's about to strike another person. Whatever state this is in, the death penalty exists. This guy's freaking out, but in his own way that I can't even describe.
Do you want to be screened for an attorney?
I don't care.
Mr. Jones.
And you know what? I think this is why you should say no to drugs, kids. Because you would end up like this guy, Vampire Man. A convict launches himself at the victim's family is up next at number 3.
No, Your Honor. Nothing, thank you.
This courtroom went into chaos in Wisconsin after convict man Andrew launched himself into the audience. The victim's family was sitting in the first 2 rows. Police officers quickly restrained him. They then tasered him to bring him under control. Andrew was convicted with 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide in the death of Greg Peters and his girlfriend Jennifer Lewick, who was actually a police officer.
Go! Taser! Taser! Taser!
A convicted man being pepper sprayed in court is next up on our list at number 2. So for this one, we have a convicted killer who was in front of a judge while getting sentencing. He decided he didn't want to listen to the court's rules. He has his own set of rules in mind, so police officers had to restrain him.
I know that that is something that is reserved for the most serious of cases, and I believe that this case rises.
After restraining the convicted man, he still wasn't cooperating, so the police officer takes out her pepper spray and tries to restrain the convict. You have to watch this. And finally, at number 1, we have a confessed murderer who collapsed in court after an Ohio judge sentenced him to life without parole.
Four defendants serve a term of life without parole. As to count 4 for the offense of attempted murder.
Smith Riley collapsed to the floor.
The Ohio Department of Corrections, mandatory and consecutive underlying offenses. All those counts are consecutive each other. Quote, credit for time served amount of